Mr. Luke Mikic, thank you so much for joining me today and being a playable character in a sea of non-playable characters.
I'm excited to be here, dude. You're 100% right. I love that intro. There's NPCs everywhere around the world today.
It is so scary. It's so scary. We're starting to homeschool our kids now. The government-run compulsory schools, they're unbelievable. If anyone's read Dr. John Taylor Gatto, his books about the system in the last 150 years of the education system, you got to read it. So every Bitcoiner, those are must reads for every Bitcoiner. So speaking of that, we're going to talk about price a little bit, stuff like that, because you always have great thoughts there. I want to talk about you traveling around the world a little bit, stuff like that, and just using Bitcoin. Some thoughts there. I know George Gammon a while back had some, oh, no one uses it, so no one uses gold and Bitcoin, stuff like that. So I want to touch on that, some of that kind of stuff. But first, I want to talk about what we were just talking about offline a minute ago, just the marketing for businesses. You are the 9 to 5 escape artist living a digital nomad life a few years ago. Again, you're one of the first people a few years ago when I got on Bitcoin Twitter, seeing you, seeing your content, and you have the energy to go with it too, which is amazing. But I would love for you to talk about that and just the importance of Bitcoiners and businesses for adoption. We were all here for a Bitcoin adoption and to spread this to all of humanity, and how important it is to be sharing that in different ways if you're apt to do it and if you're willing to do it. But it's how important it is for a Bitcoin business to start doing that.
Yeah, it's absolutely pivotal. I mean, as we move into the digital age, people are going to come to the realization that the traditional media that they've trusted for decades and centuries, it's failing. It's lying to us. And I think the same way that we went through this revolution 500 years ago with the separation of church and state, I think we're seeing something similar today. So for those who don't know, the invention of the printing press essentially democratized information for everybody in the early 1500s. And this led to everybody around the world saying, hang on a minute, these books are telling me different things than the church is telling me. This is a little bit weird. And it started a revolution. Long story short, we separated church and state for the first time in a long time. Now, I feel like today there's a very big similarity going on today. We have Bitcoin, which is one technology, which is similar to the printing press in many respects. But we also have many other technologies like the internet alongside Bitcoin that I believe is going to actually separate the money from the state. So again, there is this 250-year revolutionary cycle. 500 years ago, in the early 1520s, we had the separation of church and state. 250 years forward, in the 1770s, we had the two biggest revolutions in human history. This was the American Declaration of Independence and the French Revolution, almost like clockwork. And then exactly 250 years after the 1770s, that takes you to what decade? The 2020s. And I think it's really interesting that Bitcoin is kind of growing up and it's getting to this stage where I think it's big enough to potentially be a very big tool that helps us separate money from state. So that's a little bit of context for why I think it's so important that every single business and individual around the world today is going to have to adopt an online strategy or an online playbook. And I think we're coming to the realization now in the late 2020s that everybody has lost trust in the traditional media. So I'm actually writing a book on the 3 exponential trends that the digital renaissance man is using to become the new rich. And the 3 exponential trends, one of them is obviously Bitcoin. If you have a look at the number of Bitcoin users, it's gone exponential since 2020, which is very interesting, depending upon how you measure Bitcoin adoption, which is a controversial topic that no one in Bitcoin can agree on. I like to say there's about 40 million Bitcoin users looking at on-chain data. That's kind of like a conservative estimate. So that's one exponential trend, Bitcoin. And that's because people don't trust the government to look after their money, and people want financial sovereignty. Another revolution that's going on today, or an exponential trend that's happening, is the rise of digital nomads. So from the year 2000 to 2018, the number of digital nomads rose from 0 to 4.8 million digital nomads. And then a little bit of an inflection point happened in 2018 and 2019. And today, in 2024, there's actually 35 million digital nomads. So that trend has gone absolutely exponential since 2018. And this is because people don't trust their government in regards to what they're actually getting as services for the money they pay in taxes. So people are saying, I want geographical sovereignty. Okay, so Bitcoin is financial sovereignty. The digital nomads want geographical sovereignty. And then there's this third pillar that you've kind of mentioned. Bitcoin businesses are creating these online presences. And this is because there's another exponential trend going on right now. And this one's a little bit harder to pin down or identify as the first two. But I think we're kind of seeing this renaissance or this exponential trend of people becoming self-employed. So I've gone and had a look at all the figures of how many people are, ditching the 9 to 5 and creating self-employed businesses, and it's going exponential. Even the best proxy for this is actually looking at the number of YouTube channels. So last year in 2023, there was like 44 million YouTube channels around the world. In 2024, that grew to 114 million. So that more than doubled in the past year. So I think this is another exponential trend. And this is, again, why are we seeing this exponential trend of people becoming self-employed and spinning up YouTube channels? It's because people don't trust the government and the educational system to actually give us good education and put us in jobs that are actually going to be useful in the digital age. Our education system fundamentally has not changed since the 1800s and is designed to, it's designed for a way to help the little guy get a job working in a factory or working in a machine in the industrial age. But we've transitioned into a really big revolution. We're in the information age now, and our education system is fundamentally flawed. It's not set up in a way to actually train people to become rich in the digital age. The education system today trains us to specialize. And that's the complete opposite thing you want to do in the digital age. You want to be a generalist. You want to be a polymath. You want to be almost like what the original Renaissance men were in the 1600s. They were generalists. Michelangelo, Da Vinci, they were all generalists. They specialize in many different fields. So that's a little bit of a long way of me answering that original question about why
I
every
love that.
Bitcoin business needs to be online. But I feel like we're going through this decentralized revolution, which is highlighted by these three exponential trends, and it's very, very clear. Like, having a business online is the way to go in the future. And I really do think that's the only way you're going to build trust in a world that is very obviously losing trust in institutions. Okay, like mainstream media. Nobody watches mainstream media. Like Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson and all of the big podcasts in the world get more views than the mainstream media. So I think, again, if you're going to be selling anything online, you want to actually have an online profile, and people want to see more about you and see whether they can trust you or not. So a long way of answering it, Brandon, but I hope that was useful.
No, I absolutely love that. Um, the only thing I would push back on is that, or no, first off, actually, it's I don't know if it's hyperbole or something like that, but that's what I was gonna push back. But the Kiyosaki thing first, though, before I forget, is the generalist. And that was the first time. That's the John Taylor Gatto books we were mentioning earlier too. Like every Bitcoiner needs to read those, because compulsory school doesn't teach you how to do any of these things, and they're teaching you to specialize. And we've got AI to do that, like you said. We've got robots that can be doing these things. We have the knowledge at our fingertips. So the humans are meant to be generalists. And Robert Kiyosaki, as I was telling you offline, is one of my biggest mentors. And he would talk about being a generalist, and humans are built to be generalists. So you can know things about everything, and you're not pigeonholed into one little thing of, because now I got to vote like through my job, and I've got to vote through the money that I'm using. And like, you're just like, you're in a silo. So it's really fascinating that, that you say that. I love that. Like, we could not be more aligned on that. And I love that your banner, by the way, says accelerating adoption, because I'm an accelerationist myself. So accelerating
Mhm.
adoption through this education and through what we're doing in this digital nomad lifestyle is really where it truly is at. So I love that you say that. And now, of course, I can't remember exactly what I was going to say, but it was a joke in a way. I'm going to say, but there's one thing I'm going to push back on, but it'll come back to me. In saying all that, though, do you think that this transformation we're going through, do you think it comes bottom up through education? Because I feel like there's this rift within Bitcoin, and there's many people that are like, well, it's got to come from top down. It's got to be governments that are making it legal tender and forcing Bitcoin onto people, I guess, for lack of a better phrase, or the big sovereign wealth funds are going to kind of do their thing, or presidents, and they're switching and they're now for it. Or do you think it's bottom up? Do you think it's education? It's doing what you're doing. It's doing what Bitcoin trading cards is doing. It's doing what we go on spaces, or we go, we're making YouTube videos. We're making content from the bottom up. We're forcing politicians to change, the bottom up transformation, and forcing politics being downstream from culture. Where do you think is it both, or is it more, should we be looking at it from one side or the other?
We want to thank our sponsor, This show is presented by Bitcoin Trading Cards, an orange pill in a pack, making talking about things that normally make you want to cry fun and easy. The scarcest and most educational cards to ever exist, available now.
So I've got a really controversial view on this topic that's going to trigger a lot of Bitcoiners. So let me reframe this by first saying what I want is I want the little guy to buy as much Bitcoin as possible. I've made videos in the past saying, look, there's a possibility for 100 million families in the world to accumulate 0.1 Bitcoin. And I think that's going to be enough generational wealth to free your family from fiat forever. So again, like what we do with the YouTube, the education stuff, like I'm trying to educate the masses. I'm trying to educate the little guy because I want them to buy Bitcoin before the big guy, okay? Now, in saying all of that, that's what I want, but what's going to happen is Bitcoin's going to have fundamentally two different adoption curves. So we have Bitcoin, the adoption curve of medium of exchange. This is the one that most people look at. They say, okay, how do we measure Bitcoin adoption? How many of the masses are using Bitcoin? And they look at that and like the masses aren't using Bitcoin. The masses aren't interested in Bitcoin. The masses aren't, they're trading shitcoins and they're not, like even if you look at Google Trends today, it's 2024, nobody's interested in Bitcoin. This whole exponential parabolic ran up that Bitcoin's had from 16K to 70K this year, there was no increase in the Google search trends for Bitcoin, buy Bitcoin, or even crypto. This whole exponential trend or this parabolic rally was created by institutional interest, okay? So this is where I'm going. We're going to have two different adoption curves. The medium of exchange adoption curve is going to be much slower to evolve because this is going to be what triggers people. The masses don't matter, okay? The masses fundamentally aren't going to be the thing that drives Bitcoin to $1 million or $10 million a coin. This is the biggest pushback I get because I like to throw around some crazy numbers. I like to think I actually back up my numbers. There's lots of people in the space who throw around crazy price predictions, but I like to think that I bring the receipts and the data and the history and the technological adoption curves and the data behind these price numbers. But I've made videos in the past saying it's my base case right now is that we're going to see $1 million Bitcoin and global adoption is going to be less than 3 or 4%. Or we're going to see Bitcoin at $5 million a coin and global adoption is going to be less than 2 or 3%. And that is because the masses don't really matter. What matters is looking at the people who control the most amount of money and watching what they're actually doing, okay? So this gets into like the second adoption curve. So Bitcoin's medium of exchange adoption curve is going to be much slower because the masses don't catch on to trends until it's too late. Now, what the big people who drive Bitcoin's store of value or monetization adoption curve, they're getting into Bitcoin in a very big way, in an exponential fashion since 2020, actually. So Bitcoin's store of value adoption curve is going to happen much quicker, just from a function of there not being many Bitcoin available for sale. So there's only 2 million Bitcoin available for sale today, and I think we're in a fundamentally different era post 2020. So before 2020, there was no public corporations, public billionaires like Michael Saylor. There was no nation states buying Bitcoin. There was no nation states mining Bitcoin. There was no pension funds buying hundreds of millions of dollars worth of Bitcoin. There was none of this happening before 2020. So before 2020 was the retail era of Bitcoin. 99.9% of the trading was retail speculators. That was the masses. The masses were trading Bitcoin. But post 2020, I believe we're in a fundamentally different era. And since 2020, we've seen 1 million Bitcoin leave the exchanges. So if this trend continues, like right now, I think 35% of all the available Bitcoin has left the exchanges since 2020. So if that continues, there's no Bitcoin left on exchanges in 2028. Now that's going to be really interesting. I don't know what's going to happen when there's no Bitcoin left on exchanges. I've kind of said in the past, I think that's going to be the first time we find out what's the true price of Bitcoin. Because when there's no Bitcoin on exchanges, we're sure that there's no paper manipulation going on at Coinbase, Binance, Kraken, any of these other exchanges. Who knows what's going on? But we do know at FTX there was a significant price suppression regime going on there. They were supposed to be holding something like 80,000 Bitcoin. And when the tide went out and we found out when SBF was swimming naked, they held 0 Bitcoin. So again, who knows if that's happening in other exchanges, but I think 2028 is going to be a really interesting time. And by then, there's probably going to be no Bitcoin on exchanges if the past 4.5 years of data continues, which I think it will. And I think that's going to be really interesting. And it's going to be the people like BlackRock, Michael Saylor, or any of the other public companies today in 2024 that right now are borrowing fiat to buy Bitcoin, like Metaplanet, like Semler Scientific, even Michael Dell's tweeting a lot about Bitcoin recently, the 10th richest man. Like, these are the entities who are going to drive hyper Bitcoinization and push Bitcoin up the monetization phase of its adoption curve much quicker than most people think. So again, the reason we do what we're doing is because I'm screaming, I'm yelling, I'm saying, look at all the billionaires getting into Bitcoin. Bitcoin is going to go up a lot quicker than a lot of people think. It's going to break all of these stupid models like the power law model and diminishing returns theory. all of those are going to be broken to the upside, and the masses is going to be left with not as much Bitcoin in their wallets as they could have had. So I'm not sure. I would love your thoughts on that, Brandon. What are your thoughts regarding adoption and how it's going to play out?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And this is like the next question or two I wanted to ask you was like, how fast truly will price go up? Because I don't think people realize it's like there's these nuanced areas of the Bitcoin community where you can find some of this talk, right? Where it's like, people will, like when BlackRock was coming in over the last year, people would be like, yeah, cool, you could buy from me $25 million a coin. Like, I don't think people understand that vast majority of Bitcoiners themselves, they're not giving them up. And so to your point, like the price only skyrockets. Like you said, Omega candles, Samson, like what you guys have been saying, like this goes up $1 million a day, like type of price action we're talking about. And that's what I think just gets lost in the day to day. So I think that I couldn't agree more. And that's what I was going to have you touch on, honestly, of like just some of those dynamics of how fast that could go up. I know you talked about like, and the other part of this too was there's like nuance to it, because I couldn't agree more. I feel like the education that we're all doing is meant for the little guy. And I know there's some people out there, they're like trying to talk to, the sovereign wealth fund or whatever. I got it. And some of the content we're doing is for that as well. However, like you said, we're trying to have one silo for the masses where it's the normie, it's the pre-coiner or whatever, where it's like, hey guys, get in now. Because I'm telling you, this silo, the thing that actually drives price, like you little guys don't drive price, but we're trying to educate you that you need to get in now to front run these guys over here, this silo, which actually does drive the price of the sovereign wealth funds and stuff like that. So I look at like George Gamm, like I mentioned earlier, he's going around, he's like, well, I went to Argentina, I went to here and there, and guys, I got to tell you, they're not using Bitcoin, they're not using gold, they're not using any of these things. So we're kind of screwed. It's like, are people just conflating like the time horizons? Like, come on, it doesn't work that way. Like George is a smart guy, but it's like, are you serious? Like, really? Like, come on, so like, anyway, I love all your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah. So I think George is one of the smartest guys going around. I'm actually lucky enough to be recording this from his house right now in Medellin, Colombia. Funny story.
No, that's hilarious.
But yeah, I think it's very difficult to get a gauge on Bitcoin adoption by the masses, because like we say, the masses don't matter. And I actually would agree with George that there's not many masses using Bitcoin in Argentina.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, there is enough people for me to get by in Argentina, so I can comfortably swap Bitcoin for pesos in Argentina very easily, $1,000 worth of Bitcoin at a time. Pam and I pay for massages with Bitcoin in Argentina. We can buy groceries with Bitcoin in Argentina. So it is a lot more advanced than many other countries. You just need to know the right places to go. But how quick is this going to happen? You mentioned one of my favorite Bitcoiners, Samson Mao by name, then with the Omega candle. And the short answer to your original question is yes, we're going to see an Omega candle. That's how Bitcoin is. That's how I think that's my base case right now. I think we're going to see an Omega candle event before 2030. Now, a lot of people say, Luke, what's so magical about this 2030 number you talk about? Well, this is because I actually look at Bitcoin, and I think I might have been one of the earlier people in the Bitcoin space to write an article comparing Bitcoin or looking at it through the lens of it being a technological adoption and actually mapping an S-curve onto Bitcoin's adoption curve. And I did this in 2020 and 2021 actually. And I made the case that, if you look at the adoption curves of the internet, automobiles, and the smartphone, typically they're all very similar. And if you take an average of all of those adoption curves, takes all of those three technologies around the same time to go from 0% adoption to 10% adoption. So for all these technologies, that's about 11 years on average. But then an inflection point is reached in adoption, and it took all three of those technologies the same amount of time, so 10 years to go from 10% adoption to 90% adoption, which is essentially full saturation or full adoption. Now, I kind of talked about Bitcoin's two adoption curves a moment ago, and I believe that we have kind of hit the inflection point in Bitcoin's store of value adoption curve. So between 2009 and 2020, that's 11 years. So that's the exact same amount of time that we just talked about with the average of those three other adoption curves, the automobile, the internet, and the smartphone. So I feel like it's really interesting that if you go another 11 years forward from 2020, it takes you to 2031. And if you look at Bitcoin through this same lens or this same mental operating model, that means Bitcoin, the store of value, although Bitcoin should be 90% monetized by 2031. And that was the thesis I wrote about in 2021. And I said, guys, there's a little bit of data here showing us that the big guys have finally got involved. In 2021, we had Michael Saylor putting on his balance sheet. We had El Salvador, the first nation state to buy Bitcoin. We had rumors of other nation states mining Bitcoin. In 2021, we still had pension funds like Mass Mutual who'd bought $100 million worth of Bitcoin. At the time, there was a trend change in the amount of Bitcoin on exchanges. So for the first 11 years, Bitcoin were only sent to exchanges. So that exchange balance grew for 11 years. It went from 0 to 3.1 million for 11 years. But today, that's at about 2 million. So in 2021, I was like, guys, this is interesting. For the first time in Bitcoin's life, we have 18 months of data showing that coins are leaving the exchanges. You combine the on-chain data with the massive amount of hodling we're seeing, with all the public data of billionaires like Saylor, Elon Musk, Mass Mutual, all these guys buying Bitcoin. I posed a question and I said, hey, has something changed since 2020? Was 2020 the inflection point? And since then, I feel like we've only had data that confirms that thesis. And I still expect Bitcoin to be 90% monetized by 2031. This could get interesting because maybe we can get into some numbers and what that looks like a little bit later. We could run the numbers, but that's how quickly I think it's going to happen. And everything we've seen since 2021, when I wrote that article on that thesis, has confirmed that thesis in my eyes and made me even more bullish. The only thing that hasn't is the price of Bitcoin, which is really interesting. And I think we're going to see price discovery when there's no Bitcoin on exchanges.
Do you think that you talked about a few months ago the double halving? Do you think is that, I would assume, just the way you're kind of going about this, that's still completely like your hypothesis from a few months ago, at least, or beginning of the year, is still kind of right on? Like, we'll see the super cycle, that double halving, all this kind of plays into it. How do we? I guess what's the catalyst for? Because I think of the diminishing return, guys. I guess that's where I'm going with it. Like, people are just going to keep selling. There's always going to be sell pressure and I just feel like it's a very naive thing because like gold or the dollar is constantly being printed, constantly being devalued. Gold, if price goes up, people are going to mine more of it. We've never seen this perfectly finite supply of an asset before, where I just don't know if humans, I guess I don't think, I know none of us have ever experienced this before. And I think that's where it's the diminishing return crowd. Is it just hard to see because we're not used to this? We've never experienced an asset like this before. So people can't comprehend the price just shooting up and just going up a million. Like that in theory can happen and probably will at some point.
Yeah, so in that 2021 article, I talked about the idea that Bitcoin is a Veblen good. So that means the higher the price of Bitcoin goes up, the more attractive it becomes and the less risky it becomes. It's fundamentally different to most other assets. Like you say, when the price of gold goes up, you just go mine more gold. You can't do that with Bitcoin. And I had an interview with Samson earlier this year, and he talked about this idea of a Veblen threshold, which I thought was fascinating. And his thesis was when Bitcoin hits a certain price, all of a sudden, all of the billionaires, all of the public companies with $100 billion of cash on its balance sheet, like Apple has today, they all of a sudden have to get an allocation to Bitcoin. And these guys with $100 billion of cash on their balance sheet and firms like Bridgewater Capital, they are going to be indiscriminate allocators to Bitcoin. So that means they don't care what the price is. They're just going to tell their board, look, we need a 1% allocation to Bitcoin. We have $100 billion of melting fiat on our balance sheet. We need to go out there and buy $1 billion tomorrow. Don't care what the price is. We need a 1% allocation to hedge against the possibility that Bitcoin succeeds. Okay. Now, again, I think that kind of threshold happens around, let's say, 500,000 a coin, or maybe $1 million a coin. Maybe when it's close to gold's parity, I think it becomes big enough for a lot of these companies to start putting it in their public treasury. Okay. Again, privately, Wouldn't be surprised if Michael Dell's sitting on billions of dollars of Bitcoin. Jeff Bezos, Amazon CEO, of course he's sitting on Bitcoin. He's been on Michael Saylor's yacht multiple times, and he sold $6 billion worth of stock over the past 12 months. Some people even are asking the question, is he Mr. 100? Who knows? I think like we got Mark Zuckerberg, who has a goat named Bitcoin. All of these guys own it privately. They're not stupid. They've watched what Michael Saylor's done over the past 4 years as he's climbed up the world's richest man leaderboard, and how he's taken his company MicroStrategy from a $1.3 billion dead company to a $26 billion company in 4 years. That's how he's 26x the market cap of MicroStrategy in 4 years. Okay, it's nuts. So again, of course, these guys are privately paying attention to this. But when Bitcoin gets 500K or $1 million a coin, we are going to see this Veblen threshold, and all of a sudden everybody's going to have to absolutely FOMO in. And my biggest response, a lot of people say, but Luke, people will sell Bitcoin. There's going to be, all the hodlers are going to be selling their Bitcoin. And I have two answers for them. My first answer is potentially, but something might have changed already in Bitcoin's data. If you look at 2021 and that bull market, so if you actually look at the amount of coins sent to exchanges in bull markets, back in 2013, there was about 1 million Bitcoins sent to exchanges. 2017, when the price ran up to 20K, in that whole year, there was about 500,000 or 600,000 coins sent to exchanges from memory. And then in 2021, there was only 130,000 Bitcoin sent to exchanges in that bull run. Now, again, maybe that bull run, it was cut short. It only went to 60K. So maybe if it went to 100 or 150K, maybe more coins would have been sent to it. Who knows? It's a possibility. But again, I feel like, is there evidence to suggest that something's changed? Maybe, which is interesting. My second response to that kind of person would be, yes, hodlers are going to sell some Bitcoin at 100K, 200K, or 500K. But they're going to pale in comparison to the buy pressure that comes online at 500K. At $500,000 a coin, Apple, Microsoft, they're all sitting on $100, $200 billion of cash on their balance sheet. They're going to have to allocate to Bitcoin at those prices, and they're going to be price agnostic. I think let me reframe that. I don't know, but I think it's more likely that they're going to be price agnostic, which means they're just going to be indiscriminately allocating to Bitcoin, and the hodlers don't matter. Like the little guy, selling a little bit of Bitcoin, they don't necessarily matter. What matters is the big boys, and the big boys are going to continue to get into Bitcoin in an escalated and an accelerated fashion in the following years to come. So that's an answer to those questions. And then you mentioned the double halving as well. So the double halving was an idea I came up with, and it's because I think everybody's looking at the halving wrong. Everybody says correctly that the halving's going to have a smaller and a smaller impact on Bitcoin because it halves every 4 years. 50 Bitcoin reward to 25 to 12.5 to 6.25 to 3.125 or whatever it is. And people correctly say it's getting smaller. And people say if you compare that to the circulating amount of supply or the amount of Bitcoin that's been mined, which is 19.6 million, you can see it's having a smaller and a smaller effect. And that is true. So I ran the numbers in that video, having a look at the, I call it the supply shock ratio of each halving. So you compare the amount of coin that's getting cut in half the year before the halving and the year after the halving. And I compared it to the circulating supply at each halving interval. How many coins were there in 2012, 2016, 2020, 2024? And you can see clearly, if you're just looking at the circulating supply, total number of Bitcoin available for sale, you can see that the halving's having a smaller and a smaller effect. But that's the wrong way to be thinking about it. Okay. And people look at this data and they say, oh, this is why we're going to have diminishing returns because the supply shock is smaller each 4 years. So we're going to see diminishing returns. But what everybody forgets is that price is set at the margins, okay? And in that video, in the double halving thesis video, whatever we want to call it, me talking shit online, I said the real number we should be looking at is the highly liquid supply of Bitcoin. So this is the amount of Bitcoin that actually circulates on exchanges and is available for sale. And again, we've talked about the 4.5 year supply shock that we're actually living through today with the coins leaving the exchanges. This means there's less highly liquid supply for sale. And the long story short is when you run the numbers, we're actually seeing a supply shock as big in 2024 as 2012. And I'm pretty sure I made that video before I made it before the Bitcoin ETFs came online. So a lot of people say, oh, the only reason Bitcoin's at an all-time high is the ETFs. Well, that's true. The ETFs have kind of accelerated this double halving supply shock we're living through. But and that's kind of why we've hit an all-time high for the first time ever before the Bitcoin halving. But yeah, I forgot the original question, but I think I touched on everything you mentioned there. That's the double halving and how quickly I think it's going to happen.
Yeah, you nailed everything, which is amazing. I don't know how you went through all that and answered all the questions. It makes me think of the like when billionaires, like you said, when billionaires come in, when countries come in, they will, many of those entities will have limitless cash, limitless currency because they can print it. And I know there's many people asking now, like, how, if you're the USA, how are you not just printing currency hand over fist just to buy Bitcoin, which is a different story for a different day, I guess. And it's speculation or mind reading, I guess. But it's when these guys come in, and I've thought about this before, so I'm glad you touched on it, because it's like when these guys come in, that price, you're going to run through, like you said, the Bitcoin on exchanges, and then now you're trying to pry it from the hodlers. You're trying to pry it from their hands, from their cold storage. I mean, that is just going to be wild. And like you said, you're going to have some sell pressure always, whether, the miners, or you're going to have people selling at different points. But at some point, there's only so many to go around. And that's where, like you said, they're going to be price agnostic, many of these corporations or billionaires, countries, whatever it might be, and they're going to be paying whatever. And the really wild part, that's where, like, I love when you get into the numbers, because I was just thinking about this the other day, which was, if a billionaire or someone has a million, or I think I was like looking at $100 million liquid, which is, not tons of people on earth. Like, let's be honest, $100 million in cash, liquid. If you did that and you bought only 1% or 10%, and at today's, price, we'll just say 100,000 price, it turned out to be like, 15,000 Bitcoin. It's not, a million. It's not 200,000. You're way down the list, actually, of how many Bitcoin. And that's if a person with 100 million liquid cash can go put in 1 to 10% in there. And that's just because I'm thinking, okay, if someone's in there and they're not totally bought in, which is someone generally getting into the game initially, right? They're not I'm putting all my net worth into it or my liquid cash into it. So they're just kind of starting to dabble. You already get the sense of how little amount people are already going to have with these higher net worths, and what they won't have, I guess. And so this race, whenever this arms race goes off, it's going to be bonkers. It's going to be absolutely bonkers, because you're not. And then if people want more, it only drives the price up, right? You can't. There's no extra supply to get. I mean, this is just truly phenomenal of where we're gonna go. I don't know. It's hard to comprehend, but at the same time, it's not. Like it's this really weird thing. It makes me think of this question, though. So you can touch on any of that, but also when is tangentially related. When Bitcoin is at these prices in today's dollars, say it's $1 million a coin, 10 million, $100 million a coin, what will you be doing at that point? Will you still be educating people? Will you be buying apartment complexes so people can pay you back, so you can buy more Bitcoin and provide better housing for society? It's something I started asking people recently, just because part of my plan is that, like, I'm a real estate guy, like I told you earlier, and so I want to put it back into things to give me more Bitcoin. I'll know the business cycle is healed when people can pay me back in Bitcoin, right? Your tenants are paying you back in Bitcoin, stuff like that. So I would love for you, like I said, touch on any of that stuff, but also what will you be doing as this just continues to launch forward, and that kind of that next phase? I think of it as phase 2. Like, what are you doing with your next stage of your life, I guess?
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing to think about. I don't know when it's going to come. I think it comes quicker than most people think. But I think Preston Pish always talks about this idea of deploying Bitcoin back into the equity market when equities actually start outperforming Bitcoin. And I largely agree with that thesis. I don't think right now it makes any sense to be less than 99% allocated to Bitcoin economically. I mean, some people have some money in real estate. My big caveat is always, if you got more than 5% of your net worth in real estate, it's a shit coin. Sure, you can, you need a family, you need a home. A lot of people use that argument. I just say, why don't you rent? I did a video recently showing it doesn't matter under what economic calculation you've used over the past 8 years. I looked at Bitcoin's worst performing time period, which was from 2018 to 2024, where Bitcoin saw 2 bear markets and only one very small muted bull market in 2021. And even in Bitcoin's worst 7 years, it's outperformed every best performing real estate market in the world: LA, London, Toronto in Canada. So and under that hypothetical scenario, even if you're paying a ridiculous amount of rent, like $50,000 a year in rent, as opposed to paying off your own home, that's what people say to me, Luke, but you're paying off somebody else's mortgage. And I said, all right, well, let's run the numbers. So I ran the numbers. I said, didn't matter under what circumstance, holding Bitcoin was always better than real estate. That's a different tangent. My point is, yes, one day I will be allocating to real estate. One day I might be, borrowing against my Bitcoin to buy real estate and equities. It's just, when does that occur? Because we do want to make the world a better place.
Yep.
American Hodl has a really interesting thesis. I think he's the guy who thought of this idea. He says we're going to see a Bitcoin mafia one day. So we saw the PayPal mafia in the early 2000s. Peter Thiel, Max Levchin, Elon Musk. The original PayPal mafia went on to found some of the most successful companies in the world, like LinkedIn, Tesla, SpaceX, Palantir, and I feel like Bitcoiners are going to do a similar thing. Well, this is American Hodl's thesis. We're going to have a Bitcoin mafia in the future, and we're going to go and found the next, $1 trillion businesses, or the next really big successful things. It is going to be Bitcoiners who do that. So yes, I've thought about that topic a lot, and it's obviously something I'm planning on doing, and I think about it a lot because I think that day is going to come sooner than most people think. But again, I think even with Bitcoin at $10 million a coin, I'm still going to have like 80% of my net worth in Bitcoin, potentially higher, because like Bitcoin is generational wealth. Even if you can get slightly better returns in real estate or businesses or equities than Bitcoin in the year 2035, you've got to also think about, it's not just an economic decision when you're thinking about what to hold in your portfolio. It's also like a security question. Like, if real estate's 2% better, that's cool. But depending upon where you're investing your real estate, it's you're liable to the government changing the laws, changing the tax rates, depreciation, all of the extra headaches with real estate, as opposed to Bitcoin, you just hold it in self-custody and don't move it for 20 years. And it's far more secure in a multi-signature setup, or even just holding your own keys, far more secure than holding a home that you can't really hide, or any of that stuff. So yes, I definitely will be trying to spend my Bitcoin in the future to make the world a better place. And then the other question was this idea of billionaire FOMO. That's kind of what you were beginning to talk about there. And yeah, I think like my
FOMO,
mental operating model hasn't. What's that?
Yeah, country FOMO, them defunding themselves basically and transferring their wealth to Bitcoiners.
Yeah, that's definitely coming. I mean, the Kingdom of Bhutan shocked a lot of people this year when they came out, when they got exposed in the bankruptcy filings of BlockFi and Celsius. There was the sovereign wealth fund of the Kingdom of Bhutan, which is a tiny little country in Southeast Asia with 500,000 people in it. And somebody said, "Hey, look, that's Druck. That's the name of the sovereign wealth fund of the Kingdom of Bhutan. What are they doing on Celsius and BlockFi, buying tens of millions of dollars of Bitcoin and taking out these big tens of millions of dollars of US dollar stablecoin loans? What's going on there?" And then the Kingdom of Bhutan, the government came out with a presser a couple of weeks later, and they said, "Yep, you caught us. We were using BlockFi and Celsius to buy Bitcoin and stablecoins, but guess what? We've actually been mining Bitcoin since 2019, since it was $5,000 a coin. And you know what? We're going to invest another $500 million into furthering Bitcoin mining in the country of the Kingdom of Bhutan." So if a tiny little country like the Kingdom of Bhutan is doing that right now, you can bet your bottom dollar that other countries are doing the same. There's a lot of rumors about Qatar and Saudi Arabia and, the UAE. There's lots of these Middle Eastern countries that also look interested in Bitcoin. So yes, I think nation states are mining Bitcoin today, and they have been mining Bitcoin for at least 5 years. I don't believe that the Kingdom of Bhutan was the first nation state to be mining Bitcoin. I think there's probably other more successful, richer, smarter nations that have been doing it for a very long time. And yeah, it's only inevitable that nation states begin printing money to buy Bitcoin on the open market in the future as well. I think it's just going to be a natural, like a Darwinian process. Those who are stupid enough to sell the Bitcoin, like Germany, who are right now selling 50,000 Bitcoin as we speak, at the time of recording for paper fiat, they're going to end up the same way they ended up in the 1920s, poetically, 100 years ago. So the Weimar mark actually hyperinflated in the year 1924, exactly 100 years later. And today in 2024, they're selling Bitcoin. They're the 5th largest Bitcoin holder in the world from a government standpoint. They're squatting on 50,000 coins, and they're selling it for worthless paper toilet currency again. So I think somebody on Twitter made an interesting point, and they said, who cares what Germany's doing? They haven't made a right decision in the past 100 years, and that's true. They've shut down all their nuclear power. They've hyperinflated their currency. They've elected psychopaths in the 1930s. I met lots of very friendly German people at BTC Prague a couple of weeks ago, so I'm going to be careful with what I say about their beloved country, but economically, they're not making great decisions. So yes, there's going to be countries like America and Germany who are selling their Bitcoin, but there's going to be smarter countries like El Salvador and the Kingdom of Bhutan and Oman, who recently invested $1 billion into Bitcoin mining, who will be printing currency to get Bitcoin and even taking out debt to buy the Bitcoin.
Boy, it's so incredible. It makes me think of, I saw someone, very similar to what you had seen on Twitter. Somebody was just like, if you want to know what to do in your country, just do the opposite of what Germany does, or, something like to that effect. It's just brilliant. And I also think that, and I kind of touched on this earlier, and then you kind of touched on it again. It's in my way of thinking of it is I'll know, because this is why I left real estate. I was telling you earlier, this is one of the reasons I left real estate and came to Bitcoin, because the business cycle made no sense. I mean, you mentioned Preston, and like nothing was making sense. Right? Like all the PE ratios, this and that. I mean, everything you looked. That's why I think macro people in general, most macro people have such a hard time. I mean, they're trying to look at all the models, right? And all the legacy models are busted when it comes to Bitcoin. And that's one of the cliches or the euphemisms, I guess. So it's like, I'll know when it's safe to go back into the wild and like step back out of the house again and invest in society when Bitcoin can be paid back to me through that business or whatever, like we said, tenants, or someone's at the laundromat and I own the laundromat and then they're paying me back in Bitcoin or whatever it might be. I think that's when I'll know, okay, it's safe to go back out in the wild again. Like you said, it might be 5 years from now, or it could be 20 years from now. But that to me is when it's like, okay, it's safe to go back out there because of all the ramifications. It's not just the return, right? It's like, as we know, just going down this road, it's all like the chaos, right? Like my business might get burned down, like someone might get hurt at my business because society has decayed so much that it's not just some like return thing. And then like you mentioned this too, the red tape and I got to deal with the taxes and the CPAs and the IRS and securities law and all this stuff. And it's like, at some point, and they're passing more of them every single day. And it's just like, what is going on? And so just hunkering down, hodling is just really the best choice until things start to heal and you can go back out in the wild. So please feel free to touch on any of that, but also I wanted to kind of transition to some of your Bitcoin conspiracy theories, because I know you've got some, your different conspiracy theories you're kind of known for too, whether it's, the FTX stuff, which we've already talked about a little bit, the ETFs, maybe possible 6102s, things like that. What are some of your top Bitcoin conspiracy theories that you're working on lately?
Oh, spicy topic. Yeah, I kind of like, I'm a little bit shameless. I walk around in Colombia with no shoes, and people look at me and they think, what's going on? There's a gringo with a wild haircut with no shoes on in Colombia.
Confident.
For those who know,
man.
You're a gringo. Yeah. Like I just don't care what people think about me. So, and like, I don't have any employer telling me I can or cannot say things. So I just say what I think and what I think we should be watching. So as soon as BlackRock launched their Bitcoin, as soon as they announced the BlackRock, I'll start with the spiciest. BlackRock announced their Bitcoin spot ETF in like June 2023. And the day after that happened, I released a tweet thread that went pretty mega viral. I think it got like 6 million views or something on Twitter. And it was, people were pointing out the fact that on page 24 on BlackRock's ETF filing, there's some interesting wording. And they said, if there is a hard fork in Bitcoin, hypothetically, if there's a hard fork, BlackRock is under no obligation to choose and follow the most economic chain. So literally the day after that ETF was announced, I said, well, this is interesting wording in their filing. Let's dive a little bit deeper into the background of BlackRock and Larry Fink. And of course, you see all these connections. Larry Fink is not only a contributor for the World Economic Forum, he's actually on the board of directors. So he's really close-knit with Klaus Schwab, and everybody knows the World Economic Forum is a Malthusian cult, as my friend George Gavin calls them. Yep. They are anti-energy. They are anti-life. BlackRock obviously tried to push for that ESG agenda in 2021 and 2022 before that miraculously failed. So I just made a speculation, and I said, look, I think we should be paying attention to BlackRock. this is hype. This is very interesting. Is this going to be a potential nation state attack on Bitcoin? Again, are they going to try to create a hard fork, and then they're going to, once they have a significant amount of Bitcoin under control, are they going to try to create a green Bitcoin or a proof of stake Bitcoin or an ESG friendly Bitcoin? So I think that's right now. I think that's most likely scenario. I think that's my base case. 2025, 2026, maybe 2027, a bit later. Maybe we see an attack from BlackRock. So that's probably my one of my higher conviction, conspiracy theories about BlackRock. Obviously, everything's a probability. So there's lots of people saying, oh, but they had to make that disclosure on page 24 of the ETF filing. Oh, BlackRock's just buying Bitcoin because they just want to make money. Oh, that's a possibility. Again, everything's a probability. And the only people who are idiots are people who say like, this is 100% the probability of X, Y, Z happening. Like everything changes. Everything's on a spectrum. Aside from decentralization is not a spectrum. Sorry to the Ethereum bros who might be watching this video. Are you decentralized enough or not? And only Bitcoin passes that test. So I think that's the BlackRock conspiracy theory is one I think a lot of people should be paying attention to. Do not trust BlackRock with your ETF. There's lots of people saying, oh, BlackRock's this highly regulated US entity. There's no way they're doing paper Bitcoin. There's no way they're going to be a part of a 6102. I just think those people are potentially paid off, or maybe they're spooks, or, you should not be trusting BlackRock with your Bitcoin. Larry thinks, he's got a colorful history. He's been on record. I play the video all the time in my videos. He's directly said, at BlackRock, we force the change of companies and behaviors. We will manipulate. I can't remember the rest of it, but I wouldn't be trusting BlackRock. 6102s, they definitely come in. It's just a natural evolution of Bitcoin, hyper-Bitcoinizing. Governments, of course, will try to seize Bitcoin. That's come in. I think all of these events are much higher probabilities than most people think. And people just say, oh, you're just talking shit, Luke. You don't believe any of this. Well, I really do. One of the primary reasons I moved out of Australia in 2022 was because I'm afraid how Western countries are going to react to Bitcoiners. I was called a domestic terrorist in 2020 because I didn't want to wear a face diaper on my face. Yeah. I didn't want to take, let's just say, medicine from the government. That's all I'm going to say. I was called a domestic terrorist, and I was made an outcast for making very small, minor decisions. I don't think it's surprising or crazy to say that Bitcoiners might be labeled as domestic terrorists in the future for holding a money that the government can't print. They're going to say, how dare you not let us fund war in the Middle East or give money to Zelensky in Ukraine by holding your magic internet money, Bitcoin. You are domestic terrorists. I don't feel like that's such a far stretch. So I really think crazy things are going to happen. Nobody's prepared for the volatility we're going to see, not just in financial markets, but society. We're going to see much more societal volatility. The data backs that up. If you just look at the number of protests every single year since 2010, it's been rising since we entered this fourth turning era. Funny coincidence, I'll leave you with the number of global protests. It was actually beginning to go exponential in 2018 and 2019. So 2019, you saw a doubling in the amount of protests in 2018. So what's the best way for a government to stop protests and civil discussion and civil uproaring? A lockdown's pretty good in 2020. I'll just say that and I'll move on. That's an interesting rabbit hole. And there's also lots of economical rabbit holes going on in 2019 with the yield curve inverting and the interest rates in the repo market blowing up in September 2019 and the Fed printing hundreds of billions of dollars, giving it to the repo market in September 2019. It's like, when you really want to go down some rabbit holes and some conspiracy theories, there's some really interesting ones you can go down. So conspiracy theories, are there any more? I've thought of a couple there that's popped off the top of my head. Are there any other ones you can think of?
I mean, the only other thing that just came to my mind, like we talked about FTX, ETF, 6102s, where it's just even mining pool centralization, right? Because money's psychological at the end of the day. And I think that's the thing that's hard for people to wrap around their minds around too. Bitcoin is a human system still. It's a system that can run for 1,000 years, but if we're all over here and no one's using it because you've been convinced or psyoped or something into believing that it's evil or only terrorists use it and bad people, I mean, let's be real, like that's already been happening, right? So there's people that don't use it that we've all talked to and said, well, I thought it was because for bad people. I thought it was this and that. That's a person that's been psyoped and mind melted into believing something that's not true. So to your point, that is, but again, the mining pool centralization, people are concerned about that. Like, are the BlackRock, these big guys coming in and trying to coalesce and bring the pools together so they can censor blocks and censor transactions. These are all things. And what's mind blowing to me, and then I'll let you go, is that people just believe government. There's a lot of people on Bitcoin Twitter that I'll see, and they're like, well, the ETFs are secure. Like they go through a lot of stuff. It's like, well, how can you even say that? Like you're in Bitcoin for a reason, aren't you? Like we trust it, but verify. We verify what we're doing. Like we don't just blindly trust. That black box got it figured out over there. That's just, I'll never understand that. That's how there's some people who just believe government. Oh, this guy's got my best intention at heart. I'm just going to go ahead, so-and-so do it, do it for us, government. It's wild.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people on Twitter who hold Bitcoin, but I wouldn't really classify them as Bitcoiners because you can't be a Bitcoiner unless you don't trust government. Because like being a Bitcoiner, it's a lot more than just having financial sovereignty. It's having sovereignty. The way I classify a Bitcoiner, it's someone who also does not trust government in the realm of education or food or health. It's I don't really classify someone as a Bitcoiner until they've really kind of seen the government for what it is, and it's poisoning you through the food supply, and it's paying off all of the medical industry to make you sick so that you rely upon the pills. It's all like a big matrix system. They're poisoning us, they're killing us, they're stealing our wealth for inflation and taxation. It's like like true Bitcoiners don't trust ETFs because they shouldn't be trusted. Governments have an infinity. They've never shown that they should be trusted. For the past 5,000 years of monetary history, every single government, nation state, king, ruler, emperor, they've always, always, always corrupted the money supply if they could, okay? So there's lots of people who laugh as Bitcoiners on Twitter and they say, trust the ETFs, trust the ETFs. They just haven't done the work and they don't understand the history of money or the history of governments, quite frankly. That's how I feel about it.
Yeah. No, it is. I mean, what do you think it is that sets people apart? Like, because this is something I was talking to Jeff Booth the other day about this, and I was telling him, I was like, I actually could never talk about price regarding Bitcoin again and be totally fine. And like, what interests me the most is what you just laid out there, which is like schooling. Like why are we here on earth, right? Like these deep philosophical things like just are fascinating to me. Like why do people believe government? Why do people just blindly trust other, like that to me is so fascinating. And like you said, it's an ethos that a true Bitcoiner has. Like, what do you think? Do you think it's people's experiments? Is it Stockholm syndrome that they just believe their abuser, the governments, or is it like all the experiences you go through in life that make you? I know for me, I look at myself, and you and I were talking offline. I was telling you my story of just seeing, getting rug pulled or these things happening, being, seeing what happens in politics, or like honestly, I played hockey my entire life. I got in fights. Like one of my things I always tell people is I think there's men have such a problem today, and you nailed some of it, which is the fiat food, right? The foods, the soys in the foods, changing people so they don't lash out at the government. I mean, I don't know if you can call that some like really grandiose thing anymore. Like that's pretty obvious at this point, where people won't say no, they won't lash out at the government anymore because they've been soyed down. And like I grew up getting in fights, men have a problem because most men aren't punched in the face anymore. There's no accountability in society anymore. It's just like, I can go be a keyboard warrior, say whatever I want, and no one's going to say anything to me. And that emotion instead of fact, or over fact, instead of like, hey, I'm talking, crap to somebody, and then all of a sudden he just socks me in the face, or we're on the rink and you're doing something, and then there's accountability for that. It's like, I got my butt beat. Like, that stinks. I shouldn't do that anymore. That to me is like, that's just like the underpinning of society has just been lost. And I just like to land the plane. What do you think it is that makes that ethos, that true Bitcoiner, people who find it and it just like, oh my gosh, that's it, versus people who are kind of like, I'm kind of tap dancing around Bitcoin. Like I got it, but like, when are you selling, bro? Like when are you selling? When do you get back into fiat? Like what makes that difference where someone just like it clicks for them?
I honestly don't know, dude. It's a great question. I thought about it a lot myself. I've personally found a lot of Bitcoiners who have had super tough upbringings as kids, and that's kind of like helped them think for themselves and think outside the box. Like I think that's one of the biggest plagues in society today. Everybody trusts government because they're all reliant upon government. They're all
Mm-hmm.
reliant upon the system. And I think like when you look at things from a cyclical kind of nature, it kind of makes sense. Like I'm a big proponent or a fan, I should say, of the 90-year fourth turning
Mm-hmm.
thesis. Every 90 years, you have a 20-year period of chaos. And then, right now that's unwinding. So that's unwinding between 2008 and 2030. That's the crisis era of the fourth turning. And that's predicted pretty much every major, uprising or, political chaos over the past 500 years. So 90 years ago was the 1930s. You had the rise of Hitler, Mussolini, and just madness in the world. 90 years before then, you had the American Civil War. 90 years before then, you had the 1770s revolution in America. So this is like a cycle that's unwinding today. We also at the unwinding stage of this big 80-year long-term debt cycle. So every 80 years, this cycle unwinds. And when it does, governments become increasingly tyrannical. They need to come up with all these different lies to force the population to, be okay with this massive amount of inflation that inflates away the government's debt. Again, the last time that cycle unwinded was 1940s. So about the same time as that fourth turning cycle. And in the 1940s, we had World War II. The perfect excuse government used to let inflation run super hot for the whole 1940s and pin interest rates artificially low. So the populace just got their savings debased. It got halved in 10 years in the 1940s. So again, 80 years forward, that's today, the 2020s. So we're going through all of these different cycles, like 250-year revolutionary cycle we talked about earlier, 250-year empire cycle. The American empire is being challenged right now. I don't agree with the thesis that China is the next rising global superpower. We can maybe talk about that another day.
Yeah.
But there's so much confusion going on in the world today, right? All of these cycles are unwinding. We also have a 50 to 60-year technological cycle unwinding today, the Kondratiev wave cycle. And we're also kind of entering the fourth era of human civilizational organization, so to say, and that is like the entrance from that's the entrance into an information-based society. So this is like the digital revolution. The Sovereign Individual book said there was like 4 major stages of human society. We were hunters and gatherers for hundreds of thousands of years until the technology of the agricultural revolution 10,000 years ago fundamentally changed us, changed how we organized. We centralized from hunters and gatherers to in farms and villages, agricultural societies. And then we were like that for nearly 10,000 years until 1770. We had the Industrial Revolution. And then we centralized further. We went from the farms and the villages and the agricultural societies into the industrial societies. Again, first time in 10,000 years, we saw one of those changes. And then I think 250 years later, from the 1770s, we're transitioning into information societies, which is now people are going to start leaving these big mega cities like London, New York, and they're going to start working remotely. And this is the decentralized revolution we're living through today. And it's the first decentralizing technological revolution that we've seen in human history. And I think what you're seeing and a lot of the confusion and craziness around the world today is the nation state realizing this, and they're trying to grab as much of that control as they can. And, as all of these Bitcoiners and sovereign individuals leave the existing system, and we're kind of seeing this birthing of a digital renaissance, man, the government's just going to become more and more tyrannical. And I see it all as a feedback loop. So the faster the digital nomad leaves, the more tyrannical the government becomes, because in most Western countries, the top 1% pay 50% of taxes.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So in California, there's 500,000 people leaving California every year. That's why the government is talking about unrealized capital gains taxes as a possibility. And they're doing all of these more and more crazy things in the country as you see this brain drain. So again, that's kind of like my framing for the world. That's why we're seeing so much craziness right now. And this is why I think a lot of people are still so trusting of government, because again, these 90-year cycles, like the fourth turning cycle, they've lived through their whole life of trusting government, and things have been okay, not so bad. And they don't remember the 1940s or the 1930s, because no one alive today was alive during the 1930s and the 1940s, when government was incredibly tyrannical. We had 6102 in 1933. The government stole everyone's gold and you threatened to put them in jail for holding money. Like, that's ridiculous. Hitler, Mussolini, World War II. People forget all of this because we weren't alive. Okay. So again, I think those who kind of are not trusting of government today are people who just read books and they're interested by history and they're curious, and I think, like you said, Stockholm syndrome. Like 90% of the population are just Stockholm syndrome because they don't have the incentive to question the existing status quo, because they're on this hamster wheel where they have to work 50 hours a week just to pay their mortgage and pay their oppressors in all of the debt shackles that they might have. They're not incentivized to think, hang on a minute, what if this whole system is wrong and broken? And what if I shouldn't be trusting government? And all of a sudden, it's just like, there's not that incentive to be curious, because they don't have the time. Firstly, the fiat system has put them on this hamster wheel. They just don't have the time to think. But they're also not incentivized to think because the government is essentially their payer. Like in Argentina recently, like 70% of all the employers, all of the employees in Argentina, they're government employees. So that's why they've been just voting in the system for the past 90. Yeah. It was something like 12 million employees in Argentina, something like that, and like 8 million of them are government employees. So it's just like,
wow,
we're trending to that direction in America and the West, and we'll get there. Like, we're going to see 100% inflation in the West. It's coming. But Argentina is an interesting use case, because that's kind of like, okay, it's interesting in Argentina because the people voted for a man who said, you're not going to get any more handouts. The central bank is a parasite. That's his direct words. He says, the central bank is a parasite. The government's a parasite. I'm going to burn it all down. And it looks as if you need 250% inflation before the general population wakes up. And maybe that again is a very long way of me answering that question. I apologize. I can't give quick answers, but maybe that's when people will wake up from their Stockholm syndrome. When there's 250% inflation and the Argentina peso is being used as toilet paper in the country, maybe that's when people say, hang on a minute, maybe I shouldn't trust my government. Maybe I should listen to the crazy man with the mutton chops, Javier Milei, who says, actually, the reason why you're poor and there's no jobs, it's because of the government. It's the parasitic central banking cartel. That's the root of all problems. So maybe that's when people will wake up in the West.
Oh man, it's wild. I mean, number one, you need to write that book. Just phenomenal. I mean, you're a fire hydrant of information and energy. It's just incredible. I could literally do this for hours. So that's number one. What are
Thank you, sir.
Yeah,
Thank you, sir. And I could talk for hours, so I'd hate to put your listeners through that.
That's why a book would be great. They just go at their pace. There you go. It's all Luke's information all in his brain. Here you go. Really quick. So, I mean, you travel a ton, obviously. If that's not apparent at this point, then people have not been listening. But what are your thoughts on just quick thoughts on Javier Milei, Bukele, and even like what are some of the best Bitcoin communities around the world? Or some of the places that are the most apt to use it, or the easiest places to orange pill people? Like what do those travels for you been like?
Yeah, so for those who don't know, I never traveled before in my life, before I left Australia, never been international. And as soon as the international borders opened up, I was on the first flight out of there, and I haven't gone back for the past 2.5 years. So I won't be going back. So I've been looking for a new home. I think I've traveled to like 40 different cities over the past 2.5 years, and maybe about 20 countries. Wow. And the best Bitcoin adoption places are definitely El Salvador by far. Like, it's so cool in El Salvador. What's happening there is incredible. I had the privilege of visiting Berlin. I was speaking at a little Bitcoin conference in Berlin in El Salvador, a new Bitcoin circular economy. There's 600 total merchants in that tiny little town, and 150 of them are onboarded onto Bitcoin. So it's like 15% adoption in one town. And they actually all use like Wallet of Satoshi or Blue Wallet or their self-custodial wallet, which is really cool because a lot of the rest of the country use Chivo. El Zonte is not so bad. Like El Zonte uses the Bitcoin Beach wallet, Blink wallet, which is super cool. But yeah, so El Salvador is the best Bitcoin adoption place. Probably second best there is probably like an Argentina. Argentina is really cool, really easy to use Bitcoin and convert that to the local currency. So from a Bitcoiner perspective, those two countries are phenomenal. And that's one of the reasons why I'm trying to get my Argentina passport right now, because it's not only the easiest and the cheapest passport in the world to get. You literally only have to spend 6 months a year there for 2 years in a row, and you can apply for citizenship, which is super cool. But it's also like one of the cheapest countries in the world, one of the safer countries in Latin America, and like the food there is not only the cheapest in the world that I found, but it's the highest quality, which is just incredible. Because I pretty much only eat steak, so they've got like the best tasting steak in the world, and you can get big like ribeye steaks for $8 at the grocery store. And like I was trying to buy a ribeye here in Colombia. I'm in Medellin right now, and it's like the same steak that I buy for $8 in Argentina. It's like $40 in the grocery store, like $38 or something crazy. And Colombia is cheap. Like Colombia is this like I still call it like the second cheapest country in the world, but it goes to show how cheap and how high quality the meat is in Argentina. So yeah, from a nomading perspective, I really like Latin America. Like we've all been psyoped into thinking Latin America is dangerous. It's not. Like when I first told my friends I was leaving Australia to go straight to Mexico, they were all like, "Oh, bro, you're going to get shot there. You're a gringo. You stand out like a set of nuts on a pit bull. You are in so much trouble in Mexico." And I was shitting myself. Like I'd never traveled overseas and I'd never verified myself. So I was so scared. I got to Mexico. I think I've been there 3 times now, and I've spent time in like Mexico City, Tulum, Playa del Carmen, and I went to the most dangerous state in Mexico for a little bit of a laugh. I went to, what is it called? Guerrero. That's where they hold that Anacapulco conference. My buddy was speaking there. So I went there, and it was like safe. It's like safer than the West. It's safe, way safer than like Portland or Oregon or Dallas. It's like the most dangerous state in Mexico is way safer than America or the UK or France or all of these Western bloated countries. So yeah, I think I could talk about the nomading thing for years, for hours, because I love it. But I think essentially there's this like thesis and philosophy in Bitcoin: don't trust, verify. I would encourage people to not only do that with their financial sovereignty, but also their geographical sovereignty. And that is, go to Mexico, go to El Salvador, go to Colombia. It's not as dangerous as we've been psyoped into thinking. And, that's the whole thesis of the book. The digital renaissance man, he has financial sovereignty with Bitcoin, but he also has geographical sovereignty. He knows how to save. You can cut your tax bill from there is no tax bill if you're a nomad. Like I'd be paying tens of thousands of dollars of tax in Australia right now, but traveling because people say, isn't it expensive to travel, Luke? No. Like I've been to like 40 cities over the past 2.5 years. I've probably spent more than a Bitcoin traveling, just in flights and, paying extra in Airbnbs, but I've saved more than that in taxes just by setting up your taxes in a very, favorable way. Like people don't know. You can go to Paraguay and you can pay $1,600, $1,600 to get tax residency in Paraguay, and it takes 2 to 5 days to sort. And once you're there, you're a tax resident of Paraguay. You don't need to pay taxes to your bloated country like Canada that's, changing its capital gains inclusion rate to 66.5%. Or you don't need to be in America with the threat of unrealized capital gains taxes, which will eventually come. Or you don't need to be in Australia paying 40 to 50% taxes like I would have had to be. Like, there's many aspects to the nomading rabbit hole that I can definitely dive into.
Man, this is so amazing. What are you studying right now? Like, what are you reading? What are you studying? Or what have you studied in the past, I guess? Like, what are some of the things just to make you, just to make, you Luke? And how did you become this way, I guess? I was mentioning, Bob Proctor earlier, Jim Rohn, like all these people, Kiyosaki, that made me, I guess, part of who I am, right? But what are you studying? What have you studied to become you?
Yeah, so like one of the first books I recommend people read is The Sovereign Individual. I think that's the best mental operating, or that's the best framework for the world today. And the book was written in 1997. And shit, you not. There's a paragraph in there that literally predicts as the government is going to be very threatened by these digital nomads who are jumping from favorable tax havens the book says in 1997, because the state and the government will be threatened, they might do something crazy like create a biological virus and lock down all of the national borders around the world as the sole purpose of gaining control and stopping the nomad from hopping from country to country. The book predicted Bitcoin in 1997. Before the internet was even called the internet, it was called the World Wide Web. Predicted video calls like we're using right now. It predicted the smartphone. That book is absolutely incredible. So that's my first. I've read that book like 2.5 times, and I encourage everyone to read it because it really does highlight the gravity of the revolution we're living through today. So I love that book. I've read it a few times. I love reading things. I just really like reading books. So all your Bitcoin books, the Fiat standard, the Bitcoin standard, John Gatto, you mentioned Gatto earlier. I've read a lot of that. And just like I'm just always interested in trying to learn as much as possible. I read a really fascinating book recently, Where's My Flying Car? That I would just encourage people to read that. It's just a phenomenal book about technology. I've done the deep dive on, all of the cycles that we're living through today, the fourth turning cycle, the long-term debt cycle. I've read everything Dalio's written. I'm just all I do is I just make videos about Bitcoin. So I kind of have the perfect job. I get to make videos about Bitcoin. So that means a lot of the videos I make, I can just go read really interesting things. And if I think there's an interesting idea there to make a video about, I can share that with the world. And I just essentially think of myself as an aggregator. I'm interested by all of the weird topics around the world. So I just go out there and spend 20 hours reading and researching a topic, and I try to synthesize it down to a 10-minute YouTube video. Because I think that's the plague we're living through today. The educational system is fundamentally flawed. They don't want you to learn. They don't want to teach you about money. And so I think it's upon people like us to teach people about money, teach people about geographical sovereignty. People just aren't aware that they can just leave Australia or leave Canada or leave the UK and stop paying 50% taxes and go and live somewhere else like Argentina, and not only save $100,000, $200,000, $1 million a year on taxes, but you get better quality of life. It's not dangerous. It's safer. It's cleaner. It's nicer. That's a long way of me saying that's what makes me me. I've just always been a weird kid. I've always been curious. I've always been interested by things, and now my dream job is to essentially just talk about things that interest me on YouTube, and I help other Bitcoin companies do the same. I work with many different Bitcoiners and Bitcoin companies to help amplify their message on YouTube. That's what I do. I help scale Bitcoin-only individuals and Bitcoin-only companies' social media profiles, because that I suppose makes me a little bit of who I am. I had the privilege of working for Mark Moss in 2021. He was the dude who actually got me out of Australia. So obviously,
Wow.
He's got 500,000 subs on YouTube, incredibly smart, incredibly wise, and he sent me down lots of different rabbit holes. So his influence on me helped me not only go down lots of different rabbit holes, but got me out of Australia and taught me lots of things about growing social media profiles in the 2 years I was working for him. So that's what makes me me. I've always been a weird kid. I'm always curious, and I think we're living through the biggest revolution in human history, and I really mean that. I'm working on another book that's a Bitcoin book that's titled the Economic Singularity, and I think what we're living through today it's massive. That's 65,000 words deep, but I haven't touched it because now I'm focusing on the Nomad book, which is 50,000 words deep, and I want to finish that one first. But I just love reading, love writing. I love trying to I really get real joy when I get a message from someone saying, "Hey, what you said about the other day was really interesting, and it's changed my life in XYZ way." I get a kick out of that, and I just like talking about Bitcoin, and I like talking and meeting other Bitcoiners like yourself. That's another big thing that the Bitcoin industry has given me. It's given me the opportunity to travel and just talk to fascinating people. I was homeless 7 years ago, and last week I got to interview the Giga Chad, Michael Saylor, who's an actual billionaire. It's the Bitcoin industry. I think it's the most interesting industry in the world, and you get the opportunity to meet some really, really interesting people, and it's all proof of work based, which I love.
So incredible, man! Oh man, you're just a fire hose of information, man. It's so cool. With a few minutes left here, I want to hear your orange pill story and just kind of go through that quick, your how you started learning about money and the orange pill story. So I'd love to hear that quick. I know you've told it in the past, but I would love for anyone who doesn't know it just to have at least a quick version of it here. And And then were you a big collector or hobbyist or a trading card guy growing up? And then so those two little things, and then we'll play the quick lightning round word association game here to wrap it up.
I love the word association game.
Yeah.
Speaking of a game I love, I actually have a pack of BTC trading cards somewhere around me. I normally have them for interviews, but funny enough, I actually don't have them on me right
Oh.
now. We just moved into a new place. There you go.
Yeah.
Look at them. Yeah, so
Right.
me personally, love the cards, love BTC trading cards, love what you guys are doing. I was a football card collector when I was growing up in high school. So I always loved. There you go. Maybe that's partially why I was orange pilled. Always loved scarcity. And yeah, I loved
Yeah.
football when I was a little bit. Like I really loved Australian Football League. I still think that's the best sport in the world.
Explain that really quick, because that's different than even what people think of football or football, right? Like it's so is it rugby, is it soccer, is it American football? Like for people who don't know, could you explain kind of the different how people differentiate those?
It's a combination of all of the best sports in the world with no rules. It's incredible. So like it's a lot of people say, yeah, it's so difficult to describe. I'd encourage people to just go to YouTube and go AFL highlights, Australian Football League highlights, or biggest hits. Because AFL, when I was growing up, it was the greatest game in the world. You can, so you run 365. So in rugby, you only go back and forths. And in AFL, you can do anything. You can hit people. There's fights all the time. You can jump on people's heads to catch the ball. It's a little bit similar to soccer in the respect that you have to kick it through like a goals kind of thing. But soccer's a pussy sport. You're not even allowed to touch other boys. But in AFL,
You
it's
gotta
like
fake it. Yeah.
you can knock them out. Yeah, there's none of that. There's no pussies in AFL. It's the best sport in the world. It's better. It combines all of the good aspects of NFL, soccer, football, rugby, and it combines it all together into this crazy sport that just has no rules, and it's nuts.
Amazing.
So I'd encourage people to watch AFL, and I love that. I wanted to play that professionally when I was a kid, which is why I love the AFL trading cards. I love scarcity. So trading cards, big fan. Love scarcity. I love and Bitcoin's such a digital thing. Like having tangible little things like trading cards that teach you fun little facts about central banking or, Bitcoin supply. I think that's really unique in the Bitcoin space. So I'm definitely a physical memento maximalist. So yeah, trading cards. Now, personal story. I hate talking about myself. I really do. But I'm gonna. So my orange pilling story. I suppose. I think when I was at university in 2018, I heard about Bitcoin. And at the time, I was just looking for the next thing to get rich because I moved out of home when I was 16 with like $100 to my name. So I was homeless for a few years, always couch surfing, always looking for a way to, make more money, so to say. Heard about Bitcoin. And at the time, I was working 2 jobs and 2 casual jobs and studying a double major in maths and chemistry at university because I didn't know if I wanted to be a doctor or an engineer. Fuck, I haven't had breakfast. My brain's so slow. It's 5 o'clock. Yeah, so I had no time to think about Bitcoin. I heard about Bitcoin in the car, in the radio, driving to my second job one day, and I was like, "What? There's a digital money that's scarce. There's only 21 million Bitcoin." So as soon as I heard that, I went home later that night and I just started learning as much as I could about Bitcoin. There was like a two-week period of time in 2017 where I had very little sleep because all I was listening to was Max Kaiser rants on YouTube and Andreas Antonopoulos videos on YouTube. So after that 2-week little binge, I learned enough about Bitcoin to learn that I needed to drop out of university. So I took a gap year and I started a personal training gym out of the apartment I was renting so that I could free up more time. So the personal training gym enabled me to not waste 12 hours a day studying. And I use that 12 hours a day just thinking about Bitcoin. So that's my orange pill journey. I mean, since 2018, I've just been thinking about Bitcoin, macroeconomics, technology, 12, 14 hours a day. And I just think what we're living through is the most important thing in human history. So I've essentially dedicated my life to learning as much as I could about it and now teaching other people about it. So that's my rabbit hole journey.
Amazing. Boy, oh boy, man, I could do this for hours. All right, so new segment. We just pulled them out a minute ago, but to wrap, the new segment I mean, it's been doing it for a long time, but I always say new segment. Just like if anyone's familiar with the Sunday Conversation with Caleb Presley and Barstool, he's always, it's the same thing. He's always like, we got a new segment presented by whatever it is at the time. So, and he just makes the game up, I think. But a little word association. Let's rock and roll. Satoshi Nakamoto.
Genius isn't enough.
That's the most common one I get is genius, but yeah, I agree.
Most important man in the world ever in human history.
Okay, that's a first for that. I love it. Communism.
Fundamentally flawed and ignorant of history.
Travel.
A must-have.
Politics.
Also ignorant of history. The only thing that matters is technology.
Community.
A must-have. Underrated in the 2020s.
Elon Musk.
Undecided.
I love that. Or the ordinals crowd.
Ignorant of history.
I didn't plan this. I didn't plan this way. Faith.
Like community, very underrated in the digital age and at the late stages of Fiat.
Proof of work.
An essential.
Samson Mao.
Life. Can I say life? Can I say proof of work is life?
Absolutely. Samson Mao.
Genius.
Family.
Also underrated.
Michael Saylor.
The future richest man in the world behind Satoshi Nakamoto. So also a genius.
Amazing.
Yeah, genius.
Conspiracies.
A facts. Most conspiracy theories are facts.
3-letter agencies.
Are everywhere and doing more than most people think.
Klaus Schwab.
Retired. Didn't he recently step down from the WEF for doing some very evil things and getting exposed for it? Yeah. Seven female employees were pregnant and he fired them all. That's why a lot of people call the WEF a Malthusian cult. They're not a fan of new kids.
That was one of the last ones we had here. A couple left. Actually had Malthusians next.
Also ignorant of history.
That Bitcoin trading cards.
Very underrated.
And Luke Michich and Pam's 2 digital nomads on the run.
More to come. Watch this space.
Ooh, I love that. Well, you passed. Thank you so much, man. Thank you for coming on. I could literally do this for hours. Where can people find you?
Thank you so much for having me, dude. I could literally talk about Bitcoin for hours with you. So, I'm on YouTube. Have my personal YouTube channel. Also a co-founder of BitcoinNews.com. So I'm also between those 2 channels doing like 10 videos a week on YouTube, just trying to hyper accelerate Bitcoinization. And if you want to tell me I'm crazy, you can message me on Twitter. If you need help growing your YouTube channel, if you're a Bitcoiner and if I like your message, I'll help you do that as well. So I have a ton of clients who I help increase their growth of their social media profiles, predominantly Bitcoiners on Twitter and YouTube. So yeah, that's me.
Well, thank you again, Luke. Appreciate your time and being so generous with it and being a playable character in a sea of non-playable characters. Thank you, sir.
Thanks for having me, dude. I mean it when I say it. That was one of the funnest interviews I've had. So,
thank you for checking out this episode of the Playable Characters Show, brought to you by Bitcoin Trading Cards. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of the future Bitcoin and financial experts we have on the show. Plus, we will be doing random big giveaways throughout different moments of shows of collectible cards, sats, merch, and more from guests, so you won't miss anything. This show does not constitute any investment advice, only freedom advice. Everything you see here is opinions from the host and the guests themselves, nothing further. Please don't trust, verify. For full transparency, I do lead marketing efforts at Bitcoin Trading Cards where we are trying to spread freedom to all of humanity and orange pill the world one collectible physical trading card at a time by making things fun and easy to talk about that normally make you want to cry. You can reach me directly through my email, brandon@btc-cards.com, with any inquiries or playable character suggestions. See you on the next one.